So there are a lot of games right now, really, that are going for the whole 2D space exploration sort of thing, and a lot of them are really, really good. And a lot of them tend to go for more of the action RPG style of thing. And this game, Wayward Terran Frontier Zero Falls, actually attracted me on the basis of the fact that it's really more of a simulation kind of aspect that it's going for, and it really looked like it. Very heavily sort of simulation based in terms of how everything is actually put together, and you can probably tell in the background already that there's a lot of very intricate detail going on in pretty much every mechanical aspect of the game, and that's what initially sort of drew me to it. And as it turns out, that's actually very much what it is. It's heavily simulation based, and I normally don't like to do the whole it's like this game plus this game kind of thing, because I find that it's usually not that helpful. But in this case, I kind of couldn't help myself because of how much it reminded me of a couple things and how difficult it kind of is to describe as a whole without some sort of comparison. And that's mostly down to the way that the mechanics actually operate in conjunction with each other to create something that's really, I don't know, really pretty interesting. So I would have to say that if you've ever played either of the games I'm about to list, then you'll probably understand what I mean, and that's kind of why I had to make the list in the first place. So it's kind of like the game Star Sector. If you've ever played Star Sector, it used to be called Starfarer. It's really awesome 2D space sim kind of experience. And Cortex Command put together. And by that, I mean it's very much on a sort of per pixel basis. Everything is done in a very detailed manner to where even damage on your ship is actually simulated pixel by pixel. Shields work that way too. The shields of your ship get damaged by a sort of pixel per pixel basis, and everything that the ship is actually built from and how it needs to simulate itself is done in exactly the same way. It reminds me of Cortex Command in that how you actually have to build your base, and you sort of put all of these bits together to create one large base that actually functions, you know, as something greater than the sum of its parts, and it can be taken apart bit by bit, pixel by pixel, through battle. And that's what kind of makes Cortex Command so fun to watch things go wrong, effectively, because they can go wrong in spectacular ways depending on what exactly you're facing. And this game has a very similar feel to that. It looks just aesthetically very similar to something like Star Sector, but aside from the base sort of battle controls, it's actually not that similar to Star Sector. The actual story and everything is going a very different direction. It's very sort of single-player exploration focused with a very snarky AI. It has a pretty good sense of humor, actually. And in battle, the just general engagements tend to happen at a much larger distance than something like Star Sector, which is more of like an arcadey kind of space combat. In this case, it's much longer distance. It's almost something like you would see with the X games, to be honest, only in 2D. Things like missiles and weapons of that nature have very, very long ranges. So, you know, the bullets can start flying before you can even see each other visually. You just sort of detect each other on radar first. Your sensors will show that there's a ship there, but you don't actually see it physically yet. That's kind of how it works. And that makes the game's combat really satisfying, but also really the way that the game works, it makes the entire thing have a very, very high sort of floor, or a high kind of learning curve, because the actual ship building and things like that is very complicated, to be honest. You have to do everything from actually use conduits to route plasma from your generators to every individual part that needs power and make sure they're routed in such a way that the power gets to each part in a kind of well-timed fashion, so you're not having, say, the engines take up most of the power and then your sensors are like failing because they're starved of the power and things like that. You have to make sure it's somewhat symmetrical, and if you're building an asymmetrical design, you have to put a lot of effort into actually designing the power grid to actually work correctly. And some people are probably not going to get on with that because of the amount of detail involved, but some people, like myself, really, really enjoy the satisfaction of planning something out and making it work, even if it takes longer than originally intended because something went horrifically wrong the first try. This is one of those losing is fun kind of games where every time something goes wrong, it's usually pretty spectacular and is kind of a good story in and of itself, even if it didn't work out like you'd hoped. The game even goes so far as to simulate individual capacitors on your ship's power grid and which ones have how much energy in them, and which ones are connected to which parts of the ship, so that they know how much energy they have that can be dumped into each one and things like that. It actually plots them all on a graph for you, which is pretty It's detailed, but it's very useful because that graph shows you exactly how much power that each action you're doing is actually taking out of your capacitor network and how maybe you could improve it for the future. And that also means that if your ship gets damaged, all these individual pieces get damaged as well. You can actually watch your ship take damage pixel by pixel, and you can just, I suppose, zoom in is a good way to put it. Just stop controlling the ship and instead start controlling your actual person, the human that you're playing, at any time. And you can walk around on other stations, you can board other ships, invited or not, and do things like that. And they also plan on having EVA aspects of the game where you can get like an environmental suit and go out in space and actually do mining and boarding and things like that by just jumping out, effectively. Right now, if you jump out in space, you're not going to last very long. But you can do it, or just have it happen to you accidentally. I've been in battles before where I had the cockpit area of the ship facing a bit too far forward and got hit by like a missile strike or something, and it actually opened up the cockpit to space, and I was sucked out and killed because of the actual forces involved in that, which is really cool that it actually goes into that sort of detail. This also means that there's a repair system that is done in exactly the same way that the damage system is done. Each individual little square is repairable, so it can actually get really hectic, and this is where the FTL comparisons come in as well, where you can have individual people manning different stations. So you can have NPCs following you, and you can tell them, hey, man that console right there, and in the ship's design, the console is connected to, say, some of the cannons. So that means that they're going to be manning some of the cannons for you while you're driving and manning the other weapons that are attached to the main sort of pilot seat, as it were. And this culminates in large battles where, as you're taking missile fire and things, and you're hoping your shields are going to hold out long enough on one side to where you just stop piloting the ship for a second, and then you have your friends and yourself go down and put out fires and start repairing things just bit by bit to try and keep the battle going and try not to explode. And it makes for really hectic, really intense battles where even when things go wrong, it's really exciting. Because if you actually stop piloting the ship while it's getting destroyed, you can see all the individual bits being taken off of it. You can learn the schematic of an enemy ship so that you know where things like reactors are, because reactor breaches tend to be very exciting, if you get what I mean. They tend to explode. So if you know where to target to actually get to the sort of power grid of the enemy ship, you could take down some of their weapons, or at the best situation, detonate some of their reactors and have their ship blown to pieces. And the ships can actually be literally blown to pieces. You can take them out and carve them up into multiple separate pieces and, basically have this big vacuum of space open because the entire engine section of the ship got detached from the rest of it and is floating off somewhere else. And that's the sort of detail that it goes to, which is very impressive. Even little things like repair drones, for instance. If you have repair drones set up either on a station or on a ship even, which is actually what you're seeing right now, all those little bitty green beams are repair drones trying to repair that ship that I'm destroying. Even they have specific setups where you have to make sure that they're put in the schematic of a ship in a certain way so that when they leave, it doesn't create like a giant vacuum and kill people, because they have to go out into space, obviously, so you got to make sure they're set up right to do that and not harm the ship, because they're supposed to repair it, I've been told. And the ship design is interesting, because I think a lot of games in the sort of single-player aspect right now are doing ship design in you constantly design new ships from the ground up, like reassembly, for instance. But in this case, even though you can, in the other modes, you can design new ships completely from scratch, what the single-player content is actually based off of is taking new ships back to your base so that they can be researched, and then you can modify the design from what it already is after that. Like this ship I happened to capture, it's a modded ship that I captured in a fairly ridiculous battle that I unfortunately didn't get on film, that I took back and modified a bit to have a Higgs drive in it, which is basically like a warp drive. I sort of sacrificed some rear armor on the ship because it's mostly a front-facing ship anyway, so the rear doesn't tend to get hit that often, and it's very well shielded back there. So I sacrificed some of that to put in a bit more of a conduit network for the reactors, leading to one of these Higgs drives so that I can travel much faster. And that's basically what the single player is about in terms of ship design. You're trying to get existing designs, either from researching blueprints or from actually taking ships back to your base and researching them directly by having them, and then just change them up, make different variants and things like that from there, which is really cool, because I think that's honestly one of the best ways to do this kind of ship design, because like I said, it's very complicated and there's a lot of details in it. So you're going to need something that teaches the player what all of this even is. So basically you have to see an already completed ship in order to even start designing it. So you have a really good blueprint for how to actually go from there, kind of built into that system, which I think is a really good way to do it. Everything pretty much is enterable in this game, interestingly enough, so you can do things like blast a hole in the side of an enemy ship and then board it and just kill all of them on board and take their ship if you want to. You can actually do that, and it's very effective. If you see a ship that you really want, you can just try and disable it but not destroy it, and then actually basically Grand Theft spaceship back to your base. And it actually makes some fun. One of the last non-filmed incidents that I had was getting pretty much the entire rear half of my ship destroyed where I couldn't move very well, and then floating up to another ship that was partially destroyed and all this wreckage around this asteroid belt, and then entering it, killing the one guy that was still alive on board, and then going down and repairing the reactors and engines enough that I could reach to actually get it moving again and then fly it back to my base and somehow live. It's just little moments like that that make this game definitely very interesting. So it's available right now for $30, which is a high ask, and the developers know that, but it is also a pretty ambitious project from a very, very small group of like 2 to 3 people. And they also have a Kickstarter going, so if you want to check it out, the link is of course in the description below this video, and I would highly recommend it if you're into the whole ship building or space sim genres, because they're pretty burgeoning right now, which is cool to see. There's a lot going on in those genres, and this has a place that it definitely deserves because of the interesting simulation layer that everything runs off of with so much detail. Even things like asteroids. Individual asteroids are actually have tunnel networks in them and things that you can enter and mine in, and all this is just going to be expanded in the future, and they're already encouraging modding and constantly updating how the mod tools work and things like that. It's just, it's a really cool game that does what we've probably seen several times in a very different way than how we usually ever see it, if that makes sense. It's a really cool game that I definitely am excited to see more of. The development is currently a bit slow because of the small number of people developing it, but it is steady, it is going. And even if you don't want to buy it right now because of the, perils of early access, this is absolutely one to keep an eye on because it's doing something that I don't think I've ever actually seen done so well to this level before. And I mean, look at that, you can just see the ship being cut in half in real time. That's really cool. And I hope it continues to get updates in the future and eventually ends up in a state that the developers themselves are proud to put out. So this is Wayward Terran Frontier Zero Falls, a very, very interesting attempt at the 2D space sim genre with such sort of granular detail and everything that it makes me really excited for what both they and the prospective modders can do in the future, because there's already some really interesting stuff out there. And with a base like this, imagining something like encountering an alien artifact in space, some sort of weird station or something, and being able to explore it in this engine with the way that they have everything so detailed and so individually set up, definitely excites me for what this game could actually be in the future, and I definitely see what the developers are actually going for, and I see the potential here. So I'm more than happy to actually pass this one on and say, definitely take a look at it. And once again, if you're not comfortable with fronting $30 on an unfinished product, then keep it on your wish list or something, keep an eye on it, because I think it's going to be going places, even if it's going to get there a little slower as a result of a small dev team. So yeah, thank you guys very, very much for watching. This has been a really interesting one to take a look at, and I plan on keeping up with it myself. I'll see you guys next time.